Greetings, everyone. Welcome to episode 139 of The Glow. We're coming at you live on Facebook. We'll be available on the replay on YouTube, available in podcast form, available here on archive, and always available here and now. So good to be with you. My name is Brian Piergrossi, author of The Big Glow and The Wow of the Now, life coach, run retreats, online classes and courses on empowerment, inner peace, love, freedom, a deeper state of presence that welcomes the magic and miracles of life here and now, and really delighted, enlightened to have Dale Allen Hoffman joining me today. It's going to be really fun to connect with him and delve into some things together. Let me see if I can, let me know where you're from. I always love hearing where people are from. Click the wow button, let me know you're here. I'm going to just share this on my page as we get warmed up, tuned up. It's a beautiful Tuesday morning here in Asheville. Wafika Najib Hakgi. So good to have you here. Where are you from? Thanks for being here. I'm going to share this on a couple different spots. Get the community rocking and rolling. And really creating a space. I put out a post last week about how creating an intention to make this more of a conversational space, having really amazing guests that I'm familiar with, and some that I'm not familiar with so much, but people that really can take the conversation into an open to another space, and it's also for you to share with us well and join us as well. Welcome, Beat from Norway. Hello from Asheville. Welcome everybody. Let me just do one more. Let's see. Share on my timeline. Yes. So it's exciting. It's like another level. And this is episode 139. So there's a bunch of other ones to check back on and tune into that are here. But at the same time, it feels like the start of something new. Like we're taking it to another level. From Syria. That's awesome. Thanks for joining us. I know things have been a bit challenging there of late. And this is a great place to tune in. We have people internationally, that this is a really international community. So it's been wonderful to have people from all different parts of the world tuning in that really we can see where we're the same and where we're different, where we are the same. The essence is the same. So there's differences on the surface, different cultures, different places, different cultural expressions of who and what we are, and yet there's the same essence underneath, That's so beautiful to recognize and realize. Hey, Andy, can you do me a favor, and can you write Dale and just let him know that we're on and point him to this particular spot? I know he's looking for us out there, and so if you could just tell him where we are so he can tune in here and join us, that would be fantastic. Dale, I talked to him this morning just briefly on the phone, and he's like, I said, how are you doing? And he says, I'm wide open. And I thought that was like the greatest answer that I've ever heard, right? So, like, so often in America, we're like, how you doing? Hi, everybody says, how you doing? How you doing? How are you? How are you? How you doing? How is everything? How are you doing? And people say, I'm doing good. But usually people say, I'm doing good. I'm doing fine. I'm doing just fine. How are you doing? I'm doing good. How are you doing? So, and then some people may say, I'm doing bad, But it's like, what is good? We're creating this differentiation, this distinction, this duality of good and bad. I'm good, now I'm bad. But what if you're just wide open? What if you're just wide open to... I thought you were in class, Phyllis. What if this is your class, this is your school right here, your education. This is where we educate each other. Welcome, Phyllis. And there's Dale. Let's bring him into the mix. He's coming on, just a moment. So he's talking about, so I gave you I'm adding you to the call, Dale. So you just have to like accept the invitation. There should be a button that you accept it.
Did it work now?
There he is. Yes.
This is like a few attempts here, so I'm here though. I made him.
Welcome. So
Hi.
I was just talking about how we were talking on the phone earlier, and I said, how you doing? You said, I'm wide open. And how I
yeah,
love
I'm
that
kind of
response.
wide open a lot.
Yeah, I love that response, the sense of like, because people will be like, oh, I'm good, I'm doing good, how you doing? Or I'm doing bad, or I'm doing, but like this duality of like good or bad, I'm good or I'm bad. But what about this, I'm just wide open to whatever the moment presents, whatever the moment arises.
I mentioned to you, there's on the phone, it's like I've done my best to kind of move beyond good and bad as much as I'm able to, the labeling of right and wrong. It's like as soon as you label bad, you moniker it, you put something on it, and you go into a resistance to trying not to feel something that doesn't feel comfortable, but the discomfort comes from the fact that something's trying to arise, and you're trying to hold it back. And of course, that's going to multiply the very thing you're trying to hold back. With me, it's like being wide open. Sometimes that's, and other times it's just like, yeah. So, and I do my best to just stay open. And sometimes being wide open means, I think you're kind of like me in that you're sort of hermetic. I'm kind of hermetic. I love being around people, but there's a point where I sort of have to pull back and just kind of go off into my space or something. But the thing about being wide open, though, means that it just opens me up to the little tiny things I wouldn't normally recognize, I think, if I wasn't. Mm-hmm. Just the little things that kind of make the soul open. And it also means that sometimes you feel a little, I don't know if vulnerable is the word, but, I just can't imagine living any other way at this point. I tried so hard to live up to some kind of ideal of being awake or not awake, and I just let it go. And yeah, so.
Yeah, well, I think it's almost to me like that's what it's all about. It's like, all these words and all this dogma and all these teachings and all these, those processes and strategies and all these things. And it's like, what does it really come down to? It's just being wide open to the moment. Like, you can use different words for it, like absolute surrender or completely letting go, or, letting God, direct things, or it's all this different terminology. But it's like, it's like there's a sense of like there's something here and there's something here, and this thing is kind of like resisting or kind of like fighting or trying to control or trying to manipulate. But what if it's just like wide open? Then that's the ultimate unification.
Yeah, I mean, and it's I think I talked probably like when we did our urban mystic retreat, I talked sort of about how we have those kind of goals that we set that we're supposed to be more spiritual, more awake, more conscious, more whatever that may be. And it's almost like you create this stress trying to live up to something that you feel maybe on some core level people feel that they're not that, so they have to try to be more of that, yet that's really all that you are, is spiritual. You really are, the pure frequency. You are breath, you are life itself. And the thing about being open, to me, you know how it all started for me? It was like 15 years ago. It was at the end of an event. I don't remember where the heck I was, somewhere out in the Midwest. And it's like at the end of these events, you throw a word into the circle: love, peace, prayer, forgiveness. And I realized that it was a day where I felt really spoken through at this event that I was facilitating, and I threw the word open out. And it was really amazing for me that over the next few weeks and months and years, open seemed to, wow, it's like it encapsulated all those other words that for years I had thrown into these circles, and yet it couldn't hold any of those words, and yet it didn't encapsulate anything. It just stayed, open. So it was like it was so all inclusive, but in the end it didn't hold anything down. We just facilitated a breathwork event this weekend at Ohm Sanctuary, and people always, they're like, is there something, should I focus on what I want to let go of? And I'm just like, what a great question. It's complete lunacy. Yeah, hold on to the thing you're trying to let go of. But just open. In the end, I notice that I breathe deeper. I notice that I see more colors than I would otherwise, just allowing myself to be in the moment, and just stay open, and not necessarily lay what my thoughts or impressions are on top, but let it inform me in ways that, again, actually I say again, but I don't think I've said it, that I may not be able to enunciate in words. And that for me is when it's like really integrated. If I can't explain it, if someone, spends an hour with me, like in a session or something, and they go, God, I don't know exactly what happened, but I can feel it. I'm like, that's the real thing. But if they catalog 10 little bullet points and stuff, I'm like, okay, were you actually listening to me? But it's really that. It's about true engagement, just being open, present.
Yeah, I think the thing that's hard, that can be difficult to understand with the mind for people, but we were just talking about briefly on the phone earlier, is you think that you're going to do well if you're like really prepared, and you really you really have the sense of structure, and you have the sense of like the bullet points and all the things you want to say, and you kind of script it out and all of this. And um, I think you can do something that's good on that level, but to really hit magic, there's this space of just letting all of that go and just really being in the moment together, and just really being alive together, and being wide open to what comes through you in the moment.
Yeah, for me, that's the funny thing too. It's like, of all the years I've been doing what I'm doing and speaking at so many places, you and I said it, I was saying it to you the other day. It's like the more I speak, the less I say, but yet what should I say? The less words I use, but yet the less words I use, the more I'm saying, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed that there's wider, sort of like when I was young and in my early 20s, and I'm out there back in the early 90s, and it's like, blah, 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 and you've read 20 books in the last 6 months, and you want to throw it all in, and I've got the lists and the notes that are like, I remember, no kidding, going back like, 15, 20 years, I remember having like 2-hour talks where I had like 5 or 6 pages of notes that I wanted to get through. And I remember the stress, and they were like, it was out in outlines, and there was like the bullet points, and the outline goes in the, it kind of keeps kind of little bit indent, a little bit further in. And I remember the stress of like, oh my God, I talked too much, and there's only 20 minutes left, and I still have 2.5 pages to go. And then the stress of trying to fit that all in. And when I look back at it, it's like, um, it's hilarious, and at the same time, um, it kind of almost puts a lump in my throat to look back at myself, almost like like a separate entity or something, and realize that I was trying so hard again, to be something or someone that I already was. If I could just allow that to come through, the rest takes care of. I mean, how much prep do you need for that? So,
It's totally amazing. It's totally amazing. Then there's a fun question here. What does Dale do? So if you want to talk about that, I will also say that there's a link I put for Dale's website if you want to check out his website and delve into what is happening. But yeah, what do you do, Dale?
well, I mean, I'm most known around the world for working with the Aramaic language, the language Jesus, quote unquote, Yeshua spoke. What I do is for many years, I spent a little over 2 decades using like ancient Aramaic, Hebrew, different kinds of texts, and unlocking what the phrases were really saying. And when you boil it down, that you end up really close to Buddhism, Taoism, a bit of Hinduism, different sort of indigenous philosophies, Aboriginal philosophies. But I was so stunned when I started getting into it. I picked what would probably seem to some people like the most impossible route to go, which is something involving the Bible in the United States of America. The reason I say that is, first of all, people, as soon as they hear you referencing something about, Jesus or whatever, or the Bible, they immediately make an impression whether they realize they're doing it or not. Either they think you're pro-Bible or you're anti-Bible, or whatever, you're running a cult, you're satanic, or you're a Bible banger, or you're homophobic, or whatever the stuff that gets thrown out there. But it's amazing. It's like I feel blessed in that I was able to see a lot of these ancient texts and open it up in a way that was completely unfiltered. I always say ancient insight for the present moment. After a couple of decades of really doing that wide open and telling people, look, this is a phrase that you've look at it in its native language, the meaning is exactly opposite, 100%, 180 degrees opposite of what it actually meant, what people think it is today. It's amazing because people would go, oh my God, like they knew on some level, on that deeper intuitive level, they knew that. And I started going deeper into the meanings of the words, which took me into the sounds and the linguistics of the letters and these ancient languages themselves, which I kept riding that wave and did a lot of vocal toning. My first book, Echoes of an Ancient Dream, it was about, in the last section's about vocal toning, and I kind of put it under the guise of that, but really it's about how there's so many layers of meaning in a single word or sound. And then I kind of rode the toning thing down, and it was like a full circle return to being a musician. When I was back in the 1980s, I was playing in like hair metal bands, 1986, 87, 88, 89. My hair was out all over the place, which I guess it still is. Um, and I found myself coming back to the levels of just pure frequency and vibration, where I even went beyond the toning of the words and the sounds. And now it's like I'm moving in toward pure oscillation itself, like the movement of air across my skin, or the rise and fall of my breath, the beating of the heart. That's what that word spiritus in Latin, spirit, or rucha in Aramaic, it means frequency or vibration. It's the movement and repose. It's doing and that. It's talking and silence. And that apparent duality, but they're not a duality, like light and dark. You're not going to find the place where something changes from positive to negative, or light and dark. We're actually talking about something that's very androgynous and singular. And it's like I kept boiling it down and boiling it down and boiling it down to, like, I got to the end of it, and there's like, I'm holding a cup and there's nothing in the cup, and that's when I realized that the cup was full. So it's interesting at one of my events, because I can, with spending, well, this is my 25th year of as a breathwork facilitator, and it's like I can draw on the background in music, or the background in ancient languages, or the background in vocal toning, or the background in like sound healing. But in the end, it all feels pure and very inclusive and open, rather than feeling like I've got like one of those business cards. Everybody, meets somebody. Here in Asheville, there's a lot of them. They flip up, and there's like 45 healing modalities on one business card, and they'll tell you, actually, I'm going to get this, 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 and this in the next 6 months. And you're like, which one's going to be the one that's going to be enough, on the business card? I don't feel that way so much as it's like I kept going wider, but the wider I got, the more I was coming more into stillness, more into silence, more into space. So
I love
anyway,
you
a
said
long way
that
around the board.
you were holding a cup and you realized and the cup became empty, and that's when you realized it was full.
Yeah.
I love that.
So I am the cup. you know. Yeah, I mean, and it really took me back to like the early 90s. I was really in the Thich Nhat Hanh, like, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94. And I found myself in the last couple of years, after not really reading a lot of spiritual books for quite a while, I went back to like Being Peace and Miracle of Mindfulness and some of these older Thich Nhat Hanh books. And it was wild because they were always so pure and still, and so there wasn't lots of words, and it was like I was reading them for the first time, but in a way I wasn't really reading them. It was almost like I was watching something that had almost been created through me because they were so pure. And it was just like lately it's been this full circle thing for me. I spent 10 years out on the road away from my family a lot, speaking at all these different places. And then late 2016 kind of came home and started doing one-on-one mentoring with a couple handfuls of people around the world. And now we're going to be getting back out on the road again this year. But it's like I was able to pull off the road, and I really pulled off of social media and lots of different, not lots of things. And it was like I was able to watch how I had been sort of on this train and riding the train, keeping up to, again, whatever the ideal was. And when I let myself get off the train kept moving. I felt like I was still moving in a way. And it took like months and months and months and months before I got more silent and more still. And that space just started opening up. And then like is fresh the word, like this refreshed, recalibrated vision started opening up through my heart. And that's the space I'm in now, which um, it's like if I'm on my way to an event or something, I'm not usually even thinking about what I'm going to talk about. Maybe the title's there, and I'll give them a title, and then I'll say the title once so they think I talked about it. But for the most
Yeah,
part, as long as I'm open, it takes
yeah,
care of itself. You know how that works.
no, yeah. It's so amazing. We're in that same kind of um, we're in that same space, and it's funny. Even this morning, um, talking on the phone, and like, well, we at least need a title, right? Then I decide, well, we don't even need that. Let's just go.
Yeah,
Let's
we
just
didn't even
go
come up with one. So the anti-title.
Yeah, the
So
anti-title.
not anti. I'm not an anti-fan, but yeah. So
And it's interesting. It's a totally valid question. What do you do? And it totally is a very practical question on the level of practicality. But it gets so fascinating because what we're really doing, each in our own way, is bringing people into the essence of being. Right?
yeah.
There's not even like you say words that can really touch it. It's a space that transcends words. Because doing, it's like doing has this thing of like we're going somewhere that's better, you know and being is
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh, it's here now, right?
You're working toward a better now.
Yeah, yeah.
It's
So
like a
it's this whole
slogan or
funny
something.
thing of like, I'm going to
Yeah.
teach you how to work towards a better now, but you're ultimately going to realize that that now is here now.
Yeah. So I'm from New Jersey originally.
Uh,
Everything in New Jersey is like bigger. Well, you're basically what, Pennsylvania,
yeah, we're
but I mean,
we're across the border. I'm on the
yeah,
Pennsylvania
we're
side.
right across the Delaware River. But
Yeah.
I mean, everything in New Jersey was very much, although I grew up sort of in the farm towns, it was very much like bigger, better, faster, more.
Yep.
And there was always this pursuit thing, and there was the way things had to be done. And I'm happy that I was born there because at least it gave me the ability, especially working with biblical stuff for so long, to say things that would be difficult to say and just kind of hit people straight between the eyes with it without
Yep.
candy coating it. So I'm happy for that. But it's funny too because that kind of, for a while, it was like I spent a lot of time creating this great great persona, of whatever Dale Allen Hoffman, and living up to that and
Yep.
marketing that and putting it out there. And then people would meet me and they'd be like, wow, you're not like what I thought you'd be at all. And I'm like, what exactly? It's like a sort of veiled compliment. What is that exactly? And they'd be like, well, I thought, all this ancient language stuff, you'd be like kind of a prick or something, like all stuffy. And I'd be like, well, no, not exactly. And they're like, I love how you use that technique of humor in your speaking. I'm like, oh, the technique of humor. Okay. I'm like, no, I'm just kind of a smart ass. My mom said, it's always better to be a smart ass than a dumbass. So see all those New Jersey roots, they keep coming through. but it also, there's that sort of, the other part of the New Jersey aspect is there is that just work until you drop mentality. And I pretty much did that. I was just out there work until I dropped, thinking, shouldn't things be going quicker and whatever kind of things. And, lots of offers were dropped in my lap, and I'm glad that I turned things down, because I think, in terms of popularity, I could have been a lot further, but I would have lost parts of myself. And I don't, and that's when I realized there was no further, there was no distance. It was just a matter of, how authentic am I right now in the moment? And then if I take care of that, the next moment takes care of itself. So, there's that part of having to work through that sort of arrogant, own the universe. New Jersey's an interesting place. It's just an
Totally
interesting place.
interesting. Totally interesting.
So,
Such a
anyway,
great teacher to grow
but
up there.
what's that?
Such a great teacher to grow up there, South Jersey. That's the thing is
South
like
Jersey specifically.
anywhere can be a great teacher. It's like we think we have to be in a certain kind of environment for everything, but it's not the case.
Yeah,
What's really I've been looking at this lately is our friend Natalia from our Urban Mystic Retreat has joined us. Hey,
of course.
Natalia, welcome. So yeah, there's this sense of like, the ego can attach and identify itself to anything, right? It's so like slick in how it does that. So what I've been noticing, more clearly, or I've just been more interested in lately, is the spiritual identification. You attach yourself as I'm a spiritual, right? And like you said, like I've been through this and you've been through this, and it's part of the journey, so it's totally beautiful. But it's this thing of like, now I'm going to dress a certain way, and I'm going to talk a certain way, and I'm going to use certain words, and I'm going to move in a certain way, and so this is, so you're again, you're like, it's like just another way of, it's no different than materialism. It's a way of identifying with something that's outside of yourself, the illusion of something outside of yourself, and losing the authenticity of who you really are. Which, as you
Yeah.
said, is like this, whatever you want to call spiritual, like you already are that right now, and you can never not be that.
That's the fun of the whole thing for me is,
Fun.
we try so hard to be something that we already are, and we set up all this stress and all these things to live up to. And I mean, I spent a bit of time, I don't want to say that I was really in it, but observing what one would say the prosperity movement. And
Yeah.
if that's an interesting thing, because I've seen people, like, years ago, I remember reading all of Catherine Ponder's books, and, for her, prosperity was everything. Relationships, everything was included. And somehow so many, so many aspects were removed from what a lot of people are talking about prosperity, and it all has to do with stuff and cash or something, money. And it's almost like relationships and everything that are a part of that sort of fell away. But I was around that, in some different sort of, circles, especially here in the Asheville area. And I saw people trying to live up to this idea of all of their affirmations and all of their treasure mapping and all this stuff. And I saw them, it was so, it gets kind of shadowy and dark at times, because you see people sort of get on the teat of a different organization or center because they need the whatever classes and all these different things and the tithing and all that stuff going on. And I'm not saying there's something, an issue with tithing. And then it's like they find that they can't live up to what they're trying to live up to. This, whatever it is, somehow writing all the cars and everything you want down is going to make you a more spiritual person, and that's what prosperity is. So this intense form of stress is set up, and they try so hard to live up to that, and then they start having these breakdowns. But since these prosperity teachings only talk about what they call is positive or uplifting or light, which of course right there, judges that positive is good and negative is bad. Positive's the masculine. That's kind of like an arc of electricity. It's the creative spark, whereas the feminine, which is the darkness, which is the shadow, is completely pushed off to the side, because these prosperity teachings don't want to talk about anything that puts any kind of challenge of processing, into your heart. They don't want to do any of that. They just want, the easy road. Let's go for the sugar. And I watched a lot of that for so many years with people being caught on that. And then, of course, they feel like they can't get out of it because then people are going to judge them for not being able to live up to it. But I saw that sort of prosperity, new age thing move across sort of all the spirituality movement in the last 10 years with a lot of people. And then I started seeing these distinct differences between what I would call like old paradigm sort of ways of presenting to people and sort of more of a new paradigm. And for me, the funny thing about the new paradigm is it's almost, its definition is like that it's not definable, that it's so ultimately present moment, it's so rich in this moment that what it is right now isn't what it's going to be now, as opposed to then,
Or
which
even
was now
now.
then. That's the whole thing, and that it really, that's why I tell people, don't be so, like, a lot of people will say, oh, well, I don't like Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart sold so many books, so he's a sellout. And I'm like, don't sell him out, because sell him off like that, because, here's a guy who did what he did with Oprah like 10 years ago. And all these, common stay-at-home dads and housewives were like seeing things about pure consciousness. And in the end, it's like Eckhart's talking about nothing, but the nothing is the everything. And it's like I'm trying to let people know, look, don't just push him off to the side because he's sold so many books, because he's really actually saying something, which is nothing, which is everything. And I really see Eckhart as one of those more, which is funny. I mean, I say that, but then that's right next to Yogananda or Nisargadatta Maharaj, or, Sri, 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 Yabba Dabba Doo, or, from and all that. How many Sris do you need before you have enough? I don't know.
I think
I've
two
seen
or
guys
three
with six.
is the preferred.
Yeah, I've seen
More than,
six
yeah.
as much. There was like a guy came here into Asheville like maybe 6 or 7 years ago, like six, I think it was six Sris. And I was like, is it enough yet? It's like that business card with all the healing modalities. Anyway, I get a kick out of it.
Yeah, and it's easy to you identify yourself as spiritual. It's so easy to get into this superiority thing of, because the ego wants to find that in different ways. It's always looking for a way to, like, I'm better than this person, or I'm worse than that person. So I'm spiritual, you're not spiritual. I'm better than you. The New Age community can do it the same way that the Christian community or the Muslim community. It can manifest in the same way, and the essence of the realization. There's actually a term that I was reading from Eckhart that I really like. Sameness of being. I was like, yeah, that's a
Mm.
good way of saying it. This realization of sameness of being in everything. In you and me, in a tree, in a ant, in a flower, in a cloud. That's the realization.
That's so deep, because that would really scare the hell out of people that were trying to get to something more when they already are everything.
Hmm.
Interesting. Sameness. Just that word sameness. I love it because, yeah, I can see how that would simultaneously exhilarate and terrify someone. Interesting, depending on how open they are or not. So that's pretty cool.
Wideness, wide open, wide open being. I love that phrase.
Try to move you. Your eye, my phone had fallen to such a place talking to me. Okay, there we go.
Got it fixed
It's
up.
funny, like a black bar, like my phone, the thing, it slid down just enough. So I'm seeing your mouth and your nose and the top of your head, but your eyes are, and I try to pull it back up and it slid back down. So I'm going to leave it. I think there's a message there somewhere. You look blindfolded, so
Cool.
the little
Fantastic.
holster.
Hey, y'all. Thanks for being here. If you want any questions or comments you want to share, feel free to share. Natalia has a comment here. Hi, Brian. Hi, Dale. I agree any place provides an environment for growth, but it's also true that each place has a different energy and might trigger or support more growth in certain areas of being more or faster than in others. I definitely agree with that. Also, I think the deeper point that I want to make is if you feel like you're stuck somewhere, stuck, quote unquote, like, for example, someone, their children are in this particular place and they need to be there. There's actually someone here joining us from Syria, who's in a war ravaged place right now. And my point is, like, wherever you are, if you're there, then there's opportunity to awaken in that space, right? Even if there's a
Yeah,
war
absolutely.
happening, or I'm always inspired by some of the greatest. When I read people's biographies, so many people awakened in prison. You know, the place where they're the least free externally is where they found the greatest freedom internally.
Gosh, read Man's Search for Meaning from Viktor Frankl.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's probably the quintessential book of, you know, being detained in such a way, but realizing that they can't touch that. And, you know, it's such a valid thing, too, because Viktor Frankl didn't, as much as he was so deeply philosophical, he didn't intellectualize things to that point where, you know, that's another sort of, I think, new age kind of byproduct is we tend to want to intellectualize things, kind of explain things away. But
Mm-hmm.
there was something interesting about Frankel. When I first read him, like in my late teens, I remember, because he said things that were so deep and profound, but it never felt because I was at that point, like in my late teens, where I'd been, you know, the high school thing, and I'm like, I've had enough of like having to read things that were like clever, so to speak. You know, and I didn't care about it, you know, and at that point, but he said so much in a way about, you know, Krishnamurti does that to me too, where he can talk about sitting there on a porch. Krishnamurti is a great example, and just looking at a flower for 3 hours
Totally.
and watching bees coming and going. And he can say so much. He can give you more in 3 sentences than so much of that stuff that I read for years that would, you know, spend um, you know, 30 pages to say the same thing. People send me a lot of their books to like read, they want blurbs or whatever, and it's funny because sometimes they'll send me these things that are like 800 pages long, and I'm just looking at it. And I had this one guy come up to me once, and he was like, well, you know, I've tried, you know, do you know any bookstores that would want to, you know, sell this? Because I've tried to sell my book to these stores, and I'm trying to do signings, but nobody wants it. He's like, do you want to buy a copy? And he gives it to me, and it was like 800 pages long, and I'm like, well, you know, I don't know, maybe. And, you know, I just, again, I find it so intriguing that after so much time of my obsession with the words and my obsession with technicalities, trying to, you know, move beyond it, it was when I just started looking into the nature of whatever was right in front of me. That allowed me to go deeper into the next moment and the next and the next and the next. And I lost that any interest whatsoever in kind of pushing my chest out, trying to, you know, you do events occasionally, and there'll be sometimes someone in the audience that sort of wants to be recognized, you know, and they want to be
Oh yeah,
seen, and they'll
for
push
sure.
the chest out, and
Uh-huh.
like occasionally, because of the nature of what I do, um, it's kind of entertaining because someone will go and read a book about something, whether it be Aramaic or some kind of ancient language or something. So of course they read a book, so they're an expert, and will sort of beef their chest out and kind of want to push things out. And I see a little bit of that sort of like of myself from like 30 years ago in that, and it's interesting to me how even in those kinds of situations, I have zero interest in any kind of competition, one upping, or anything. All I'm interested in is, can I be wholly, fully present in this moment and stay open? And I'm not even speaking, you know, responding to someone because I'm trying to convince anything, because I don't care. Because if I'm trying to convince somebody else of something, what I'm saying about myself is I'm needing to convince myself of something. And it's like I say, you know, being to that point where you're speechless, you know, getting to the point where the words don't matter anymore, getting to that place where you're so full and yet you're so empty, you know, in Hebrew and Aramaic, kadosh, kudsha, this state where you're everywhere and now here simultaneously. You could translate that as ecstasy. That's so wholly full and yet empty, you know, and spacious in that moment. It's like that is I see that in my relationship, like with my children, with my wife. Now we've been married almost 20 years. um you know, and I feel like you and I not necessarily moving simultaneously in that direction, but we're both kind of, I almost look like you and I are like sitting in this sandbox, and we've spent years throwing things out of the sandbox, not necessarily in judgment that they weren't good. And now it's almost like we're sitting here in this sandbox full of sand and all the toys are outside and we're pointing at all the toys, like just kind of laughing and giggling and throwing the sand in the air and like having more fun with that. It's like you give a kid a $300 toy and the toy sits in the corner and they sit in the box and play with that. So, interesting little observation there.
There's a phrase that you remind me of a phrase. Beautiful what you're sharing, by the way. The vibration. I think everyone's feeling what's opening up here between us, which is the intention of what we're here beyond whatever the words we are that are being shared. There's a phrase you reminded me of that I read once. I can't remember who said it. You might know, but the quote is, "Love God and do what you want."
I don't know who said it, but it sounds good to me. God's an interesting word right there because I get messages occasionally from people that there was this one guy actually who was at one point he's messianic, without going too deep. He's kind of like a little bit of a nutcase, and he was trying to hack into my YouTube and Google accounts, several years back, and all these interesting things were going on, but he has all these different pseudonyms that he goes under. I think Christopher Bradley is the one that he uses most often. But I remember him sending me a message like a year ago, and it said, "I have a question for you. Which God do you serve?"
Right.
And I laughed at that because I'm like, where's your multiple choice that you've got okay, this God or this God? And I'm like, you're not understanding God, which comes from the Germanic good, which is a judgment of good versus bad. For me, God is such almost like a nullified term because it's all, the one, that singularity, the non-duality. And it's like the more present I can be, the more open I'm able to be in this moment. I don't like the word able, though. The more open I am in this moment, able feels like a competition. But the more open I am in this moment, the more the wow. And to me, that's so much more than any sort of anthropomorphized religious idea of what God is, especially the multiple choice God. Which one do you want to, which box are you going to check? Yeah. So.
And the way I'm feeling it is like open is not an active movement of like, I need to try to be open. How do I open? How do I get open? Right? Because that's in effect it's reinforcing the ego, which is a closed. You're identifying with a closed structure, which is you. You're identifying with a sense of you that's separate from anything else, and it's also not a passive energy either. It's like something that transcends both of those. It's a sense of like the absence of a separate sense of you making an effort. But then the mind goes, well, how do I not make an effort? Right? So what you start to do is you just start to watch. It's like John Lennon had this great song. I'm just sitting here watching the wheels go round and round. You know that one, right?
Yeah, of course.
I love to watch them roll. I'm no longer riding on the merry-go-round. I
didn't know you were going to serenade me.
So it's like you start just watching the merry-go-round. You're watching it go around. Yeah. You're not riding it anymore. And that's the beginning of that the letting go of the identification attachment. So it doesn't mean that those things can't be there, those thoughts, those ideas can't be there, but they don't. You realize it's not the essence of who you are, right? It doesn't affect the sameness of being.
Well, they're there. It's an interdependence. You're almost like they're just kind of floating by. Yeah. Like I'm seeing heart and little thumbs up floating by on the screen here. That's the thoughts. And I'm not that. A thought is a thing. A thought, people think your thoughts create your life. Nothing can be further from the truth. Prior to your thought, you had a feeling, which is a sensation of pure frequency, the sensation of what one would say, whatever spirit, that movement, that oscillation. And that's what creates your thought is actually the crystallization of your feelings. Your thoughts aren't creating anything whatsoever. Yeah. It's what's happening on the level of feeling, whether you can enunciate that in a thought or not. And so all these people are obsessing about thought. whatever. I'm entertained by that too. But
It's really fascinating. I've done experiments. So I like you'll find this humorous, I think. So I'll like walk by a highway. I mean, let me see if like thoughts create reality, right? So I walk by and a car will come and I'll be like, hit me, hit me, hit me, and the car never hits me. Like I think if I really created my reality, the car would swerve off the road and like hit me, right? And I'm like, oh, my thoughts create my reality, but it's not working. So I think there's something true to what you're saying, that there's something deeper than thought, you know, and we become so obsessed with thought where it's like we're at the stage of evolution of our consciousness where we found a new toy, you know, a new tool, and we're so obsessed with this
yeah,
new
yeah,
tool,
yeah,
and we're trying to do so much more with this tool that it's actually designed for. It has this small tiny little role, and we're trying to do everything with it, and there's these intelligence that are deeper than thought that we don't have awareness of, we've lost awareness of, or we're losing access to, and I think that's
yeah,
what we're
yeah.
awakening to.
And we can see it. I mean, thought is almost something you can almost hold in your hand. So, quote unquote, scientifically, it looks like something that we can work with and observe. Funny because, feeling and emotion, it's not quite the same thing, but even emotion in Latin, motus anima, meant energy and motion. It's energy moving. Again, we're back to that spirit. I think of that thought of living up to, trying to keep our thoughts living up to what we're supposed to be spiritually. For years, used to think of how funny it was. Like, as an example, you've got the parent that does their 20-minute meditation every day, and they lock the door and they shove the cereal in the kids' faces so that they'll stay in the kitchen and leave the parent alone while they're meditating. And the kid's like knocking on the door, and the parent's just trying to meditate. And then finally the kid opens the door and the parent's like, would you go away? I'm trying to meditate. And that's that we have that pursuit that we're trying to live up to. But yet here is, I say a lot that I love that there's yogis like Tibetan Gayato monks way up in the mountains that have been meditating, holding frequency patterns for humanity for thousands of years. I can't imagine what this world would look like without that. Yet what I really want to see is I want to see them down with their genetic birth family and all their in-laws and cousins around the table like a Thanksgiving kind of thing. I want to see all them together, and then let's see how present. And it's awesome to sort of take ourselves away. I think we all need that. That's the hermetic part of me, to like move away from society or move away from something. But the real thing, like, you mentioned to me a couple weeks ago, it was like, wow, you really are juggling a lot of stuff. Because it's like family, and it's like there's so many things going on. And our nephew and his girlfriend are living with us, and then their little, like, 5-month-old baby. And it's all these things going on. And like when you and I try to get together, it's like, oh, and then it gets kind of rescheduled because, like, Dale's got a school assembly or this or that or whatever, with one of the kids. Um, but I mean, for me, again, it's like these little hearts and thumbs or thumbs up that I'm seeing floating across the screen here. It's like the what of it, or the how even might change, and that just kind of floats by like notes on like, staff paper.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, it's not really the notes on the paper that matter. It's how deeply can I breathe in the essence, the frequency, the vibration, the depth of what they communicate, not the notes on the paper, but rather, the experience of it itself, of the sound and the silence. And it's like I spent so much time on the paper to be able to realize that the magic was between the notes, it was between the words. I spent so much time on the words that I started looking at the space between the words, and that's when I went, whoa, this is deep. So people ask me a question about something that I talked about 20 years ago, and they're waiting for an in-depth answer, and I answer with like 5 words, and they're like, what? No, I wanted this big in-depth thing. And I'm like, you know, that was me then that would answer, with a 1 hour response.
Mm-hmm.
If you need 15-year-old Dale, then go find 15-year-old Dale, because I don't know where the hell he is anymore. I just know where I am.
Mm-hmm.
So now,
You remind me of
anyway,
a couple things. One is a quote that I heard about Rumi, which I loved, and he said, Rumi was not a master of words. So paraphrasing might be exactly right, but Rumi was not a master of words. He was a master of the silence from which the words come from. I was like,
Oof.
that's it.
I've
You know?
heard that before too from someone. You know, if you ever meet Coleman Barks, who's the one, you know, I've done work over the years with Robert Bly. Robert Bly, you know, Iron John. He's sort of the whole masculine men's movement. I did several multi-day things with him over like going back years ago, and Robert was the first American to like really take Rumi's poetry and Hafez and everything. But Robert walked up to Coleman Barks in like 77 or 78, and he had these clinical translations of Rumi, and he said, "Here, let these out of their cages." And Coleman took them, and it's like he took these like Farsi and different language, like clinical American or English translations of Farsi and some other languages, and he took those clinical translations and he breathed into them and he meditated into them. It's kind of what I do in some ways, but I go even a little bit wider. And it's amazing because if you ever are around Coleman Barks, who he's the biggest selling poet of the last 30 years
Yeah.
because of those Rumi translations, but he's like, Coleman is awesome. He's this like well cultured alien. I
From
don't know
like
how else
Georgia,
to put it.
right? So Southern
What's
boy.
that?
He's from like
Yeah,
Georgia.
and well, he's from Athens,
Uh,
Georgia, but he's so quirky and
yeah.
weird. And I'm so fascinated. Anytime I've ever been able to spend some time with him, I just watch him and the quirkiness. But like, and he has all those. I love, like, my favorite music is quirky music. You know, I don't know what that, you know, the Sugar Cubes, whatever, Bjork, things like that. People with unique voices.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing about Coleman was just watching him in different settings. He had these moments when he would just kind of look down toward the ground. And some people would probably look and say, oh, he looks depressed. But he would go into these deep spaces, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I found it so intriguing because I would watch him. And that really, again, it takes us back to frequency and vibration, to that point where you're out and you're open and there's all that expression and there's the expansion. And then there's like what would appear like a retraction or a contraction. But what I really feel like is when it comes back to the center, it's also expanding. And I feel that when you're expanding, you're coming to the center again. It's not two different things. It's not up and down, in and out, light and dark, positive and negative. You know, if I had a battery here, I couldn't take that place where it changes from negative into positive. It doesn't exist. There is no such thing because it's not two different energies. It's a singularity or a continuum. And I mean, for me, being as much as I'm able to be open in the moment, I'm not deciding, do I feel more positive or do I feel more negative? If I feel negative, then I need to swing positive. And what that does is it swings people. Everybody knows that, you know, when you get those ones that have been like too heavy in whatever movement, you know, with the spirituality, and their teeth are really shiny and they bowl you over, you know, and you have to like sort of always be up and happy when you're around them. And then when you want to talk about something that's visceral and deep and requires really like a lot of breath and a lot of maybe you're in like a deep place or you just lost someone you love, you know, in the physical realm, and it's like they won't go there because they're just not able to process it because they want to be up. And somehow we've turned positive into good and negative into bad, which has meant we've turned masculine into good and feminine into bad. And if you look at what we did to Mother Earth, we've completely ignored her. We've ignored the shadow because we've somehow said that the shadow is bad. But there's no place where you can find where, you know, if you go from a dark room to a light room, you're not going to find a place where it changes from light to dark because we're not talking about two different things. They're not even interpenetrated. You know, the I Ching, the supreme ultimate, we've got the yin yang. The dot is in both because it's saying these aren't two different things. They're not even really interpenetrated. They're the same. And again, that brings me back to that sameness, which, you know, if somebody threw the word sameness out for me 30 years ago, when I was starting to meditate and becoming a spiritual being, I would have been like, no, no sameness. I don't want sameness. But it's amazing, you know, after all that pursuit of differentness and more and bigger and better, um, I realized that what can be better than now? What can be better than me just just being open now,
Mm-hmm.
be here, now. You read Be Here Now from Ram Dass, and you flip through it. There's not a lot of words in that book, but there's a lot of really amazing geometrical figures that you can sit with and look at and really get into and go beyond, the state of the words, so to speak. And anyway,
let's tie this into relationship a second. I was talking with Annie this morning, and I was just reflecting on a couple people that we know that have been in a relationship for a long time, that have separated, or whatever the word is, broke up or whatever, recently, and just reflecting how long-term relationships or partnerships or marriages or even friendships can be really difficult for people. And I was kind of exploring, like, why is that, right? And I was like, well, it's one of the big things is the accumulation of time. So there's a sense of time accumulating, and there's a sense of what's happened in the past accumulating and building. So, like, it seems like there's something about time, and there's a heaviness to time, and you did this to me last week, and you did this to me a month ago, and 5 years ago you said this, and it builds, and it gets to some point where it's something breaks, So is there a way to, how do you transcend that? How do you transcend this accumulation of time? You're someone that's been in a relationship, been married for a long time, and people are inspired by what you and Loretta have. And
people often, well, you've spent time with Loretta and I, and I mean, my wife me being out there in front of a lot of people, her being a model and like a performance artist, it's like, people are like, oh, you guys have a perfect relationship. And it's like, we kind of look at each other and giggle, and like, you couldn't handle our relationship. You would implode the first day. That's such a fascinating, it's something that I've pondered a lot, that time thing, or the past.
Yes.
That idea of the past.
Mm-hmm.
And Loretta and I have really worked at, what's the best way to put this? Worked at moving beyond the work of the past, of overcoming the past. Let me put it that way. We've worked at moving beyond the work of overcoming the past. It has to be a point where, and I mean, nothing is like the last couple of years. I think everybody, our culture everywhere, it's amazing how the last couple of years has just been strange. Not bad, just it's been an odd couple of years. 2017 was very odd. But it's like anything that hadn't been processed, I think, in a lot of people's relationships really started gurgling up to the top. A lot of things were resonating, because the more you come into that realization of the resonance of the one, the more that you're resonating with that wholeness, that oneness, the more the stuff that it's within you or contained in the packet of your past that hinders your awareness of that oneness, the more that comes into play, and that stuff rises to the top. And I mean, Loretta and I have enough stuff in our past that, we probably should have gotten divorced 18 years ago.
Right.
But we've just found that way of being able to just, again, be open and let it go. It's funny because there's been times lately where, an argument will arise, and sometimes you just say the stupidest stuff, and you just throw things out there, like trying to protect yourself. Both of us, we'll just have something really stupid, that you throw out there that years ago might have been like a total home run, and now you throw it out there, and it's like we find ourselves like in the middle of an intense argument sometimes now, and we just burst into laughter because we say the most absurd things, trying to like hold our ground, when in the end it's not, really it's me holding my ground and her holding her ground. But in the end, there's no my ground or her ground. It's just ground.
There's not any ground.
Ours.
And even that.
Yeah. And it's like, so we find ourselves, grounding out a lot more, meaning just, we still have our stuff. But that past thing is so intriguing, because it's just such a pile of crap, put simply. There's nothing in it.
Mm-hmm.
Why? And if you even think about it, it's like 100% pure insanity. Why would you, like, as an example, you have a friend that you haven't seen in like 2 years or something, and it's like you see them, oh, there they are in the crowd, and then you walk up to them, and just before you go to, they're looking away or something, just before you reach your hand out to touch their shoulder, you remember that thing that they did to you, and you pull your hand back, and then they turn around and look at you, and there's that thing in the middle. It's like, what a ridiculous way to live. But yet, I mean, me again, and I'm not leaning back on the New Jersey thing constantly, but that was my mom's thing. If my mom held, as amazing as she was, the most wide open person I've ever met in my life, that I've ever known. But the thing about my mother was, if she thought it, she said it. There was no filter. So I mean, if we're like in the grocery store and somebody is like, whatever, not moving quick enough or something, my mother would spit that out. So there was aspects of that I would do. And for me, I didn't hold on to things. I would spit them out. But then it was like when Loretta and I first got married, 20 years, it'll be 20 years in October. Um, I realized that, of course you go through that honeymoon thing that lasts 6 months, a year, 2 years. And then I realized that I could say like one phrase that would like almost be like dropping an atomic bomb on her, because there was so much fire and fury from my past that I would dump on her for the smallest things that really she wasn't even doing toward me. So then what I started doing was holding it in. So then I'd hold that back, and I'd hold on to more of the past because I didn't want to do that to her, so that it would build up, build up, build up. And then, of course, she started holding back. And there was a couple of moments there where, when I say moments, periods of time where we weren't sure if it would last. Um, but yet, in the end, gosh, we're wholly and fully committed, minus the addiction is the best way I can put it. The addiction of being in a relationship, or the addiction to having to be right, or anything like that. Again, we're open. And it makes relationship really exhilarating and amazing, but it also means being that open that you're a lot more vulnerable. And I don't mean that in a bad way. You're just a lot more open to things resonating and popping that might not feel so good sometimes. But, we do our best to not judge that. And it might take a little bit of time, but we always, come back together, and we're still here. So, but the people that do admire a lot of us because it looks like, say, they see photos of us together and, oh my God, I was like, y'all would be incinerated in the first 30 minutes if you were in the middle of this. So, but we've just committed with each other like that. And the energy, it's amazing because, I mean, we've got the cosmos swirling above us. We're in that kind of a magnitude of the depth of our love. But that requires us kind of being, I don't mean this in a bad way, like burned at the altar, several times a day. But, it's actually a pretty freaking beautiful feeling, because there's nothing being burned at that altar that's real anyway. It's just
Yeah.
that, again, from the past.
I mean, to bring it back to full circle, if you want to live wide open, then you're willing to have anything that looks like a thing be burned, be burned by the
Yeah.
fire. And even though it may, to the ego, or to it may look bad, it may even feel bad, but there's this wider perspective, like anything that's like a thing that feels like heavy, that feels solid, that feels like it's got form and shape, it's gonna get burned, and this moment
Yeah.
is wide open, and this moment is where love is, and this moment is where the sense of me and you has no separation, and this is where
Yeah.
we want to be. So we just have a couple of minutes left, but someone did ask about the Urban Mystic Retreat. Let's just touch on that really quick. We had a really amazing retreat, you, myself, and John Stringer. John will be on next week, actually, so that'll be great
Cool.
to have him here. What was it? Was it 5 days that we were together?
It was 5 days, and it was almost exactly a year ago. In a couple of weeks, it'll be a year. So
Yeah.
I wanted to do another one last year, but I was so sort of off grid, um, trying to juggle 1,000 things, and I'm full on ready, man. Let's go.
Yeah,
Let's do it. And
we're
plus,
ready.
We'll have the paradigm in May, which is the well, it's a whole different thing. The sound healing instrument that we're going to be able to work with. Sound healing is kind of a encapsulated, like, simplistic view of what that puppy can do, but really taking it down to pure frequency and vibration. So sorry, there's a neighbor's horn honking. I think something's being delivered, but anyway.
So stay tuned for an announcement on that. We started talking about it, and it's going to happen. We fine-tune the details for the next Urban Mystic Retreat, Dale and I together. And yeah, really appreciate this conversation. From the comments I've seen, it seems like everyone else is really appreciating as well. And this will also be available for replay in the archive if you want to watch it again, or you share it with your friends. Click the share button. We can continue the conversation here. You can continue to write comments, and we can respond throughout the week. It'll also be up on YouTube, and I'm working on getting it up on a podcast form as well. So, and then you can check out Dale's link, and I have some links as well below to plug in more. Thanks so much for being here, brother.
Absolutely.
So talk to you soon.
Bye.
Paul, thanks for being here. See you in the next now.